The velvet curtains of the Copacabana nightclub shimmered under the stage lights as cigarette smoke curled through the air like ghosts of forgotten promises. It was 1962, and the glittering world of entertainment hid darker shadows beneath its sequined surface. This is the story of a night when loyalty proved stronger than fear, when friendship became an act of defiance, and when one man's courage challenged the most dangerous forces in America. What happened backstage that evening would become legend, a moment when Dean Martin, the smooth-talking crooner known for his easy charm and effortless cool, revealed the steel beneath the velvet. But before we dive into this extraordinary tale, if you're enjoying stories of real courage and legendary friendships, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss more incredible stories from Hollywood's golden age. The spring evening had started like any other at Manhattan's most prestigious nightclub. Vincent Marcello, the venue's general manager, moved through the crowded room with practiced ease, greeting guests whose names appeared in gossip columns and police files with equal frequency. The Copacabana wasn't just a nightclub. It was a kingdom where entertainment and organized crime shared the same velvet booths, where deals were made over martinis and threats were delivered with a smile. Dean Martin was scheduled to perform that night, the second act in a lineup that featured his Rat Pack brother, Sammy Davis Jr. Their friendship had become the stuff of legend, two performers who'd broken through barriers of prejudice and discrimination to stand together at the pinnacle of American entertainment. But in 1962, that friendship was still a revolutionary act. Sammy had arrived early, his nervous energy filling the cramped dressing room he shared with three other performers. At 36 years old, he'd conquered every stage from Harlem's Apollo Theater to Las Vegas's biggest showrooms, but tonight something felt different. The usual pre-show butterflies had transformed into a gnawing anxiety he couldn't shake. "You're overthinking it, baby," said his handler Marcus Reynolds, a man who'd navigated the treacherous waters of show business for 2 decades. "Just get out there and do what you do best." But Sammy's instincts were rarely wrong. He'd learned to read rooms the way sailors read the sky, sensing storms before they arrived. Dean Martin arrived 90 minutes before showtime, his trademark tuxedo perfectly pressed, his manner relaxed and unhurried. At 44, Dean had mastered the art of appearing effortlessly cool, while remaining constantly aware of everything happening around him. He'd grown up in Steubenville, Ohio, the son of an Italian immigrant barber, and he'd learned early that survival sometimes meant reading between the lines of polite conversation. "Pally looks tense," Dean observed to his longtime pianist, Gerald Whitmore, as they passed Sammy's dressing room. "Word is there's trouble brewing," Gerald replied quietly. "Something about last week." Dean's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. Last week, Sammy had been photographed at a civil rights rally in Birmingham, Alabama, standing alongside ministers and activists who were demanding an end to segregation. The photograph had appeared on the front page of several newspapers, Sammy's famous face lending star power to a movement that terrified many powerful people. In the main dining room, Antonio "Tony Knuckles" Benedetto sat at his usual corner table, surrounded by men whose tailored suits couldn't quite conceal the violence they carried like cologne. Tony ran the most profitable gambling operation in New Jersey, and the Copacabana paid him $20,000 monthly for protection. Tonight, however, Tony wasn't there to collect money. He was there to deliver a message. "Where's the manager?" Tony asked the trembling waiter who approached with menus. "Mr. Marcello is backstage, sir. Shall I fetch him?" "Yeah. Tell him Tony wants a word. Now." Vincent Marcello felt his stomach drop when the waiter delivered Tony's summons. He'd been expecting this conversation, dreading it. 3 days earlier, Tony had called with explicit instructions. Tell Sammy Davis Jr. that his political activities were bad for business, and if he valued his career and his health, he'd keep his famous face out of newspapers that weren't covering entertainment. "Sammy," Vincent knocked on the dressing room door, his voice strained. "Got a minute?" Sammy opened the door, still adjusting his bow tie. "What's up, Vinny?" "I go on in 45. Vincent glanced down the hallway, then stepped inside and closed the door. "Look, I'm going to level with you. Tony Benedetto's out front and he's not happy about those Birmingham photographs. He wants you to make a public statement distancing yourself from the civil rights stuff." The room fell silent. Marcus Reynolds set down the drink he'd been preparing, his face carefully neutral. Sammy's reflection stared back from the mirror, and for a moment the confident performer vanished, replaced by a man calculating impossible odds. "Tell Tony to go to hell," Sammy said quietly. "Sammy, you don't understand." "No, Vinny, you don't understand." Sammy's voice remained calm but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "I'm tired of being told where I can eat, where I can sleep, who I can love, and now what I can believe. I won't do it. Not for Tony, not for anybody." Vincent's face went pale. "He'll kill you, I mean that literally. These aren't people who make empty threats. Then I'll die standing up." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 20 minutes later, Dean Martin was touching up his appearance in his private dressing room when the door burst open. Gerald Whitmore entered, his usual composure shattered. "We've got a serious problem. Tony Benedetto's people just went backstage. They're heading for Sammy's room right now." Dean's hand froze halfway to his pocket for his cigarette case. "How many?" "4, maybe 5. Dean stood, straightening his jacket with deliberate calm. "Get building security. Tell them to be ready, but to stay back unless I signal. And Gerald? If anything happens to me, make sure Carmen and the kids are taken care of." "Dean, you can't—" But Dean was already out the door, moving down the narrow backstage corridor with purposeful strides. He could hear raised voices ahead, Tony's distinctive rasp cutting through Sammy's measured responses. "Last chance, Davis. Make the statement, or you won't make it to the stage tonight, or any other night." Dean rounded the corner to find Sammy backed against the wall of his dressing room, 4 of Tony's enforcers surrounding him. Tony himself stood closest, one finger jabbing the air near Sammy's chest. "Gentlemen," Dean's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk, "is there a problem with the entertainment?" The room fell silent. Every man turned to face Dean Martin, who stood in the doorway as casually as if he'd just wandered in looking for a light. But there was something in his eyes, something cold and absolutely certain, that made even Tony's enforcers hesitate. "This doesn't concern you, Martin," Tony said, his voice carrying a warning. "Walk away." "Can't do that, Tony. See, Sammy and I have an act together. The people out there paid good money to see both of us perform. You mess with him, you mess with the show, you mess with the show, you mess with me." The mathematics of the moment were simple and deadly. Tony commanded an army. Dean commanded only his reputation and his refusal to back down. In the calculus of organized crime, this should have been no contest. "You're making a mistake," Tony said, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "I've got friends who—" Yeah, I know. Friends in Chicago, friends in Vegas, friends in Jersey. Here's the thing, Tony. I've got friends too." Dean pulled out his cigarette case, taking his time selecting one. "Frank's currently having dinner with Sam Giancana. You know Sam, right? Runs Chicago. Frank mentioned to Sam that if anything happened to me or my friends, Sam might take it personally. Something about respect and family and all that." It was a bluff. A magnificent, death-defying bluff. Dean had no idea where Frank Sinatra was that evening, and he certainly hadn't arranged any protective conversations with mob bosses. But he delivered the lie with such complete confidence that doubt flickered across Tony's face. "You're lying." Dean struck a match, lit his cigarette, and blew smoke toward the ceiling. "Maybe. You willing to bet your operation on it? Because if I'm telling the truth and something happens to me or Sammy, you'll have every outfit from here to California looking to make examples. Bad for business, Tony. Real bad." The silence stretched like taffy. Sammy stood frozen against the wall, barely breathing. Marcus Reynolds had gone pale as a ghost. Tony's enforcers waited for their boss's signal, hands hovering near jacket pockets that contained instruments of violence. Finally, Tony laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You got guts, Martin, stupid guts, but guts. It's a living." Tony pointed at Sammy. "This isn't over. You keep showing up in those newspapers and eventually, Dean Martin won't be around to save you." "He doesn't need saving," Dean said quietly. "And the world's changing, Tony. You can try to stop it, or you can get out of the way. Either way, it's coming. Tony stared at Dean for a long moment, then jerked his head toward the door. His enforcers filed out, followed by Tony himself, who paused in the doorway. I liked you, Martin. Shame you're throwing that away for this. No shame in standing with your friends. When they were gone, the silence in the room felt like the aftermath of a bomb blast. Sammy slowly sank into a chair, his hands shaking. Marcus poured 3 glasses of whiskey with trembling fingers. You just bet both our lives on a bluff, Sammy said, his voice barely above a whisper. Wasn't entirely a bluff, Dean replied, accepting a glass. Frank really doesn't like people messing with the Rat Pack, and Tony knows that starting a war over a political statement would bring heat nobody wants. He backed down because backing down was smarter than escalating. Or because he believed you'd actually die for me. Dean met Sammy's eyes. That wasn't a bluff at all, Pally. 45 minutes later, Sammy Davis Jr. took the stage to thunderous applause. His performance that night was transcendent, every song infused with the raw emotion of someone who'd just stared death in the face and chosen defiance. When Dean joined him for their duet, the chemistry between them crackled with an intensity the audience couldn't quite name but felt in their bones. Backstage after the show, reporters crowded around both performers. Someone asked Sammy about the Birmingham photographs, whether he planned to continue his political activism. Sammy glanced at Dean, who stood nearby signing autographs, then smiled. I'm going to keep doing what's right. That's what friends do. They stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Especially when it's dangerous. The next morning, 3 newspapers carried the story, though the details varied wildly. Some reported a backstage disagreement between performers and management. Others hinted at organized crime involvement without naming names. But among those who'd been there, who'd seen what happened, the story was already becoming legend. Antonio Benedetto never bothered Sammy Davis Jr. again. Some said Dean's bluff about Frank Sinatra and Sam Giancana had been closer to truth than anyone knew. Others claimed Tony simply recognized that the world was changing, and that targeting civil rights activists, even famous ones, brought the kind of attention that was bad for all business, legitimate and otherwise. Dean never spoke publicly about that night. When reporters asked, he'd shrug and change the subject with a joke and a smile. But years later, after both men had passed, Dean's daughter found letters Sammy had written to her father, dozens of them, spanning decades, each expressing gratitude for a friendship that had literally saved his life. The Copacabana closed its doors in 1973, another casualty of changing times and shifting entertainment landscapes. Tony Benedetto died of a heart attack in 1977, his criminal empire divided among squabbling successors. But the friendship between Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. endured until Sammy's death in 1990, with Dean serving as a pallbearer at his friend's funeral. The night Dean faced down the mob for Sammy became part of Hollywood mythology, a story about courage, friendship, and the slow, painful progress of justice. It reminds us that sometimes the most important stands we take aren't on stages or in spotlights, but in narrow backstage corridors where no cameras record our choices. Dean Martin, the smooth crooner who seemed to glide through life on charm and talent, revealed that night what many who knew him had always understood. Beneath the easy smile and casual cool was a man of absolute principle, willing to bet everything on loyalty and friendship. In an era when such stands could cost everything, Dean chose love over fear, friendship over safety. And in doing so, he proved that real courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing firm despite it, especially when standing firm means standing alone against overwhelming odds. If this story moved you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear about real friendship and courage. Subscribe for more incredible true stories from history's most fascinating moments, and let us know in the comments. Who would you stand up for, no matter the cost? Remember, legends aren't born. They're forged in moments of impossible choices. Until next time.